I have a very special guest today, and we're talking about a topic that touches all of us, parenting anxious teens. My dear friend, colleague, and our clinical director, Nancy McDermott, is here, and we see people all the time who coulda, shoulda, woulda related to anxiety.
Yep. Yeah. And like oftentimes I'm getting them as teens or even as college students. And I'm finding out that, the signs of anxiety were showing up when they were, really little. So
yeah,
we want to get in there sooner.
So we're going to go through quite a bit of things in this amazing episode. If you're watching us live, feel free to ask questions. We're going to take questions, but we're going to talk about what are some of the signs and symptoms of anxiety. And we're going to talk about parenting strategies because, there's so much we can do beyond a pill. And that's why you're here. And, we just don't know what to say sometimes to anxious kids. Yeah. There was an anxious kid on site today and, it required support of multiple trained staff. And, that's why they're here for her brain reset program. So let's jump in and let's talk about some of these signs and symptoms of anxiety. And you made a really important point that you maybe didn't realize, Nance, that some of those symptoms are there early, right?
Yes. Yep. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And so there's one quick thing I do want to say, which is that even though there's really mixed information for kids out there on social media, because there is more discussion of things like anxiety and depression or stuff, I think that there is a little bit more communication that is happening with our younger kids and teens where they will use the words anxiety or depressed or, worried or sad or whatever, where there is a little bit more actual conversation about that. So if your kid actually is using those words, take it seriously. They're not, what I mean? Even though there's a little bit of dramatization going on some of these social media platforms, when your kid is actually saying it and acknowledging that they're feeling this way, that's a serious thing. And that's something that you really want to talk to them about.
Absolutely.
If they say it, go for it.
Go for it. And and if they ask for a therapy appointment, take them.
Do it. Yeah. Do it. If they recognize
kids call here. College kids call here all the time.
All the time.
But, that's a really important point. I think sometimes parents don't realize, and, we say a lot of times, I say this all the time if you're listening on the regular, that we can only connect the dots when we look backwards, right? So parents sometimes don't connect those dots to those worried symptoms, fearful thoughts, need for reassuring questions, stomach aches, all these symptoms that show up with anxiety, sleep problems, getting to sleep, staying asleep, right?
So if your kid is not flat out using those words like anxious, worried, fearful, that kind of thing, then that is exactly what you want to start looking for. There's a lot of somatic symptoms like stomach aches, headaches, not sleeping well. You may notice them going to the bathroom a lot, those kinds of things, not eating well, like if they have a change in their eating or
eating too much,
exactly. Like you're eating your feelings. Exactly. There's a lot of
withdrawn behaviors. But I think a lot of times, Nancy, parents say to me, well, they didn't say they were depressed. They didn't say they were anxious. And why is that? And it may be that they didn't know, like it crept up on them. They may be afraid to disappoint you, right?
Also, I think just even as a society, we're getting better, I think, a little bit, but as a society, we're not really ones to talk about our feelings that much. And so a lot of times kids don't even really have the words. And that's some of the work that I'll do in a therapy session is starting to attach words to some of the things that they are experiencing, some of the thoughts they're having, some of the feelings they're having. And that can be really helpful to try to increase that language around emotion and around what they're feeling. So I actually, I don't want to jump ahead to tips too quickly, but that is one tip is for parents to start talking about their feelings more. That's helpful for your kid.
So helpful. And, a lot of parents say, well, I am talking about my feelings, but, I get that. But are we talking about a range of feelings?
Right.
Are we only talking about stress?
Right.
And like when we are stress activated, right, we don't always recognize sensations, thoughts, and feelings. And we see them only as one. I'm worried. I'm anxious. I'm this.
Right.
So they then start getting reactive to sort of everything, which is there. So let's talk about one of my favorite symptoms that nobody talks about, or I shouldn't say favorite symptoms, but one of my most misunderstood and missed symptoms, which is anxious avoidance.
Right.
So it doesn't matter what age it happens, but teens are really pretty good at anxious avoidance, actually.
Really good. I think from teenage years on. So like we adults are really good at it too. But
Yeah.
it does start a lot of times in the teenage years is where you'll see people starting to use it. Actually, it's I would even call it more almost a coping mechanism, even beyond a symptom, because that's what they're doing. They're using avoidance to not have to feel the fear and the worry and the anxiety and all that stuff like that. They're using avoidance to, in the short term, feel better. But unfortunately, avoidance in the long term reinforces the anxiety and actually shrinks your world to the point where it just will keep getting smaller and smaller as you have to avoid more and more to not feel the feelings.
Yeah, because really, what's the key to good mental health is stress tolerance, right? Is
100%.
building, and having those coping skills to do that. And so if we only feel anxiety, I hope this is an aha moment for people. If you're only feeling anxiety, right, and you always are avoiding, you're always avoiding or avoiding, how do you know how to get through uncomfortableness?
That's right. That's
you
right.
Don't.
You don't. And that's one of the keys, behind anxiety, which I think makes it slightly different than stress. And that might be a good thing for us to differentiate for people. So stress is kind of that recognition in the present moment that, the trigger that I'm facing is beyond my ability to really cope with very well, right? I don't have the resources, or the demand is too big, whatever it is. What I'm facing right now feels bigger than what I can handle. Right. So that's what fear is, very present based, overwhelm, very present based, stress, very present based. Anxiety is a little bit more future based, where it sort of feels like, the recognition of what the trigger is actually probably overblown. Like I'm thinking that the outcome is going to be way worse than it probably actually will be.
Catastrophizers.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a bit of a misunderstanding as to what my risk is, but also I'm future thinking. Oh my God, what's going to happen if? Oh my gosh, what will my life be like if? Right? I'm going into sort of future thinking, which we're not great at predicting all the time. Sometimes we are, but we're not really great. And if we have some anxiety around it, we're going to misunderstand our and misrepresent our outcomes by a long shot.
And stress goes up and comes down, and we have periods without it, where anxiety is a constant.
Somebody there, right?
Somebody has a comment, and I think this is important. Teen boys get embarrassed about symptoms and emotions. Nancy and I are mothers of teen boys, and yes, we are therapists. So, yes, we talk about feelings.
Yeah.
So first of all, kids know what they know, right? And they don't know what they don't know. So like, you're not going to be like, hey, Joey, let's sit down and talk about our feelings today. And it came out of nowhere, because they're going to be like, what the heck's wrong with you, Mom? In my house, my kids are so in touch. They'll be like, are you having a menopause thing going on?
That's hysterical.
And that's the kind of dialogue we have in our house. I don't recommend it for everybody, but I definitely get these.
If you're going to err in the direction of one or the other, more open is better than more closed.
Absolutely.
And I just want to say, in response to this comment, that is quite true. I mean, I think that boys definitely have some slightly different pressures than girls do, and it's a mixed bag for both of them. But I think for boys, because culturally we expect them to, man up and be strong about things and stuff like that, it is very hard for them to talk about feelings, especially vulnerable feelings. So if you can normalize that for them in the family, and actually even just put it right out there and say, listen, I know there's a lot of pressure on you to be strong and to not ever show weakness and stuff like that. But I want you to know that here in our house, it's perfectly okay for you to show that. And in fact, it's a good thing if you let me know if you're feeling afraid, or if you're feeling fearful, if you're feeling worried, or you're feeling really sad about something.
Yeah. In our brain behavior reset program, anxiety is just like a constant, whether it's our parents. Of course, we're all going to be anxious when we have kids that have a hard time, or our kids. But like, what I do teach a lot about is somatics. So if this is new, in a way to get your kids to connect the body without using huge amount of dialogues, is to say like, oh, where do you, I can only imagine this is stressful for you. So you validate it, and you say, put your hand on your body where you feel the most stressed. I don't think I've ever had a teenager tell me to F off or they're not going to do it. Like they just do it because It's there, and it gets them to connect a little bit, right? Like,
That's
and
right.
sometimes I'll say, like, what I encourage my parents to do is say things like, if it's not in a therapy session, right, and you're doing this at home, and obviously if your kid is really anxious and this is resonating, don't wait for help. You absolutely want to make sure you are getting help, because that's
100%.
important. But what I will say is, like, you can sit with it for a moment, and we can come back and we can talk about it. Like, just giving kids a breath where the pressure's off, and then letting them know that, yeah, we can talk about it, because sometimes, it's got to be the right time, the right place. But when you have an anxious avoider, they're never going to want to talk about it.
That's right. That's right. That's baked into the cake in some regard. And regarding the somatic piece of it, I actually want to acknowledge something, which is that, Roseanne, I'm always so impressed, because I really see you as somebody who was a woman ahead of her time, and sort of recognizing by bringing neurofeedback into your practice that calming the nervous system down and handling some of those physiological things, whether it's in the brain and how the brain is overfunctioning, or in the body or underfunctioning, and in the body, is a super key piece of actually getting this right. And I think where some people have had some therapy failures is that their therapists are only kind of handling one piece of the puzzle, which is they're either only focusing on the thoughts, or they're only focusing on the emotions. And I'm pointing to the parts of the brain as I'm saying where those occur. But they're not hitting that kind of brainstem nervous system piece, which the neurofeedback gets at, the PEMF gets at.
You got to self-regulate.
You've got to regulate, because otherwise the other stuff doesn't stick. But also, that's not thorough enough to only cover the thoughts. It's not thorough enough to only cover the emotions, because all three pieces are involved in the anxiety response, and you need to manage all three.
Yeah. And that's why, like, when people try therapy and they're like, it didn't work, it's because the nervous system is too activated. So,
that's right. And also, only focusing on thoughts is, sort of counteractive, not transformative. And so when you're always just counteracting, don't think that way, don't think that way, don't think that way, it doesn't help in the same way. Whereas when you can actually shift and change the way that the brain is functioning, which is really where we can be more helpful.
We're kind of jumping into our parent strategies, and please ask questions. But, like, one of my biggest strategies is understanding the anxious brain. So, like, what we've talked about, and if you've heard me, right, there's an activation, right? So we go from a parasympathetic to a sympathetic. That happens in any kind of stress response, right? Like, oh yeah, the thing was flooding. And then then you fix it and you're like, I'm okay, but once you're anxious, you move into this sympathetic dominance, and it's just a constant activation. So, like, when you hear, like, okay, you have any kind of kid, anxious avoider, or it's a boy, it's a girl, anybody who's resistant, it's because it's so darn uncomfortable in some way. So if they don't have that ability to calm themselves, right, then anytime we talk about it, anytime you do therapeutic work, they're just too activated to actually take something out of it. Like, yes, we're in therapy, but we've been going, how many times has somebody said in our brain behavior reset program, like, adults, kids, whatever, I've been going 3 years, been going 11 years. We had somebody, the same therapist since 1998.
Yes.
And and move through things quickly. And that's where, tools like neurofeedback, PMF. And if you're interested in working one-on-one with us, you can go to drroseanne.com/help. We only take a few people every month. And if you're really serious, like, and you're not looking to say, one day I'm going to dress this and make this day one, this is what this is about. Too many people come to me, shoulda, coulda, woulda. And I feel sad for you all, because
exactly sad, but also, the anxiety is one of those things where the more you kind of let it fester, the more it does build on itself. And so that's one of the things you can be watching out for your kids also. If you're seeing their worlds shrinking and shrinking and shrinking, and they get to the point where they're like hardly leaving their room, or they're always on their phone, and they literally are not engaging in other ways, that's a sign that you really want to start talking to them about.
And it might be why somebody said, like, their kid is especially anxious with screens, right? Which, there isn't a day that doesn't go by, mom and dads and grandparents, that don't have a screens conversation. It's a herder and a helper and all these other things. And it's about lacking self-regulation. And some of our kids seek screen time because they're looking to find something to distract their brain, just an aha. But here's somebody that says, this is amazing, right? I use CBT, but it was only helpful. We need to calm the brain first. This is their and their aha moment.
That's
and
right.
CBT is awesome.
It is awesome. It's helpful, but exactly like what that person was just describing, it's helpful, but it's only one piece. And it's kind of a small piece, actually, if I'm being honest about that. It's only really a small piece. Because if you think about it, if what you're doing with CBT, unless you understand this in kind of a bigger context, if what you're doing with CBT is just really trying to change the way you're thinking, without changing those other things, calming the nervous system, starting to get at the feelings and why you're feeling that way, and things like that. If all you're doing
connecting to the body sensations,
exactly, focusing on those thoughts and those thoughts alone, you're essentially asking a person to willpower their way past their anxiety. And that is not effective. That's essentially like trying to constantly keep a beach ball pushed down under the water. It's going to keep popping back up no matter how hard you push, right?
I love that analogy, Nancy.
Yeah, I think it's a really good visceral one, because that's exactly what it feels like. This damn feeling just keeps popping back up and popping back up.
But let's unpack that, because we have this notion that you can will anything away. Like, oh, you're a boy, like tough it up. Okay, whatever, I mean, anxiety creeps in there. I mean, yes, sometimes we have a big event, a traumatic event, right? And it causes it. But most of the time, if average age of onset is age 6, it's kind of getting in there. And then you develop all these, I call them maladaptive coping mechanisms.
That's
right?
Exactly. Withdrawal and avoidance, or overworking is a big one. Like I have some of my kids
your body goes
for 20 hours for some little exam that I'm like, so they overwork to try to make sure. And it's that uncertainty piece that they're trying to overcome. That's the real hallmark of anxiety, right? Is that you just have such a hard time tolerating the uncertainty. And so they try to do whatever they can. Avoidance feels like it's, handling it. It's only a short term,
here's a really important thing and this is why we're having this conversation is, this is the time of year we get a lot of kids that don't make it in college. I just had somebody call me from 2 years ago who, was 3 years of flunking out. And I said, I won't work with you unless you decide to take the year off.
Right, exactly. You have to kind of commit into a big, because it's going to take work now. Since
So here we are, 2 years. I mean, they must have failed another 5 years, 5 years total, whatever, of school. And I don't want this for people. And we somehow think that we can outwit anxiety, but we want, instead of this is not a burden, this is an opportunity to give your kids good skills so that they can be stress slayers in the future.
That's
and
right. I love that. Stress slayers. I love that.
Slayers. So I need, besides my magic wand, I need a sword here.
That's right.
So, but we want them to gain those skills. And a lot of the younger kids we work with, they do so well when they're older, right?
Yeah.
It's never too late to deal with it.
No, never. I mean, seriously,
never.
I've dealt with people in their 50s and 60s handling it. It's never too late.
No.
And I think one of the other pieces that has been significant for helping parents to understand, and helping kids really to understand as well, is that some level of anxiety is normal and actually really useful. There's some interesting studies out there in the world about people who, for whatever reason, some disorder or some sort of injury to the brain, lack a fear and anxiety response, and their outcomes are not good, because some element of anxiety is important to make sure you keep yourself safe, right? There's some element that's important. And so what we try to do is, kind of help our clients recognize that anxiety is to some degree normal and natural, as long as it's not getting too out of hand. And if you can turn it into moving you toward excitement, in a recognition that you're anxious because this is exciting and important to you, right? This is something that you're facing. It's really important, and you care. You're passionate about it.
Yeah.
So we want to use that anxious energy to actually build up the excitement, get you ready, make sure you're on your toes for whatever it is, but not turn to dread where you feel like, oh, I'm gonna fail at this. This is going to be a disaster, right? We got to change that way of sort of using our anxiety.
Yeah. So for sure.
Part of what we're doing is trying to get people to normalize anxiety at least a little bit. Yeah.
No. Yeah. And a little bit is good, but once you're super activated and you're reactive to a lot of things
That's
or
right.
these others, it's interfering with your life in some way, shape, or form.
Right.
And
Then it's
please
too much.
don't use those grades as your benchmark for mental
No.
health because, we've had so many kids be suicidal, just crippling
Oh,
anxiety.
yeah. No, my straight
And
A kids are some of my kids who are the most anxious and who are
yeah,
actually the most maladaptive in terms of, like I said, they may be studying all day, every day. And they don't need
yeah,
to be studying that much. And in fact,
no,
it's not a helpful thing, but it feels like
no,
that's what gives them their edge. I hear that term used all the time. That's what gives
yeah,
them that edge. No, that
no.
is
And then they
yes,
crash and burn. They go into
yeah.
adrenal burnout. They
Yeah,
go
you
to
can't keep it up.
college.
You can't
They
keep it
might
up.
start partying or I had kids never left the room that went to
Yeah.
college in these 3 decades. So let's talk about strategies. So we always talk about sharing your calm,
Yeah.
called
So important.
co-regulation.
So important, right? There's definitely particular neurons in the brain that actually have us, kind of connect to each other and regulate with each other. And so the more you can hold on to your calm and get yourself in a
Yes.
calm space, knowing that, hey, this is a normal thing, anxiety that we're dealing with. They have chosen some ways to handle it that are not helpful. So let's
Yeah.
see what we can do to sort of change that, right? The more you can stay in that calm space, the better things will go.
And a lot of times communication techniques is one of my favorite parent hacks with anxious kids, especially when they try to drag you in either through need for reassurance
Yes.
or their avoidance, or they get into, highly friction laden, as Nancy loves to call it, fact fighting.
You start fact finding.
And
Exactly. It
yes,
happened this way.
and
No, it
this
happened
is
this
where,
way. You did this.
and
No, I
that's
did that.
where
Yeah.
we dysregulate. I started to dysregulate with my 13-year-old yesterday, and I was like, I'm fact fighting with him. And I was like, we're not going to go into the facts. This is the way it's going down.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. And it can be very attractive to folks to get into the facts because you feel like you know how things happened or you saw what went down or whatever, and it's hard not to want to be right and sort of
And it also feels kind of logical. Like they're saying something that's somewhat logical, but
right.
it's not true. And then you're like, but and then
right.
the
right.
next
If you only
thing
see
you
it
know,
this way, right. Yeah.
yeah. Right.
Yeah,
And
that's
so
not gonna get you there.
So never get into that. I mean, that co-regulation and communication are two parts, but
Yeah.
of the same, coin, but also in communication is really, it's hard to know what to say and what not to say to an anxious kid. But what we want to do is focus on coping skills and stress tolerance
Well, and I will
instead of
back it up. Yeah,
rescuing.
yeah. I will back it up for 1 minute in terms of the communication. That
Yeah.
a couple of other little things too is that to the extent that you can be more of a listener, even just to get them talking about what it is they're feeling, and really just validate, as opposed to, it's so hard not to want to give an answer. I know it. I do it myself. I mean, I catch myself with my kids all the time where I'm jumping in too quick but here's what you do, right? So I have to hold myself all the time. But you really want to listen and validate first and foremost, because the other thing is that our systems are meant to connect with others, and the more we can feel truly heard and truly seen by somebody else, the better we feel about our relationship with them. And so if you can create that relationship with your kid, you're going to have a kid who's going to be more open, who's going to be more responsive, and things will go better.
Yeah.
So always my first,
And absolutely. And, there's no perfect way to do this. And when you talk about validating, you don't have to agree with somebody to say, wow, that must have been hard for you.
That's right.
Right. Don't run in and rescue. I recently had a client where their kid got into it with a teacher and, they quickly wanted to side with their child and because they felt bad and he was like a really good kid and he got really mad, but he'd never done that before. And so instead it was like, well, you can say to him, the child was saying the teacher was in the wrong and it wasn't true. Right. And there was not that. So what do you say when have somebody who's anxious and they're misperceiving things? So you can always, it doesn't matter what the scenario is, but you can say like, wow, could your anxiety, colored the way that you think about it? Now, you can't just jump in and say that to somebody.
No,
you have to have some level of communication about it, right?
And also, if you start by listening and validating, you can often get to a calmer space to where you then can start saying things like, I wonder if we look at this a little differently. I wonder if maybe your teacher was thinking blah 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 blah, blah, right?
Yeah.
And then that can start to shift the perception a little bit in the kid's head. So you're not going at them and saying, look, maybe you looked at this wrong. You know, you can, but you put it in terms of like, I wonder if we can sort of expand how we're thinking about this. I wonder if there's other ways we can think about this, and that can start to, you know, bring about the conversation of like, oh, maybe there was a little misperception there, without feeling
right, exactly. And that's a conversation that somebody has with a kid who's very used to therapy, you know, very open, and it did just open it up. That's not where you start. Somebody said like they have great success with asking more about things they're interested in, having them tell more about it. Neutral conversations, physical things like getting out there and tossing a ball always lead to better conversations.
100%.
And you have to do it. You can't just wait for something to happen. It has to be like that continual component. Like
that's right. So that's that connection with your kid that you want to always be maintaining, because that's what then allows those conversations to flow much more easily, right? The more well connected you are in the whole, you know, scheme of your life with your child, the better it's going to be in terms of being able to talk.
Yeah,
these hard
and it takes time. And you know, like teenagers, like, you know, we always think about when our kids are young and how much time we spent with them, but like they basically believed everything we said. You know what I mean?
We're,
like,
you know, we're awesome when they're little.
I know.
Then when they're teens, you're like, I don't know, are they awesome?
Now I'm like,
yeah,
come on. Of course, the Hodges are the coolest parents you got in your school. Come on. He's like, I don't know about that. I'm like, what? No, but as your kids get older, it takes more connection time for these things to happen, and I know it's harder.
Yeah,
right,
you have to be clever. And that comment was spot on in terms of, you know, the more you can kind of join in the things that they're interested in. I mean, like I've had to develop interest in anime, which I never would have had my children not gotten super interested in anime. You know, things, some video games, things like that they like to play and are really significant to them, and that can lead to really fun conversations about why and what of themselves do they see in some of the characters and things like that. Like you can have fun and interesting conversations about like why that appeals to them, and that can really start to create more connection.
Yeah,
if you play it sometimes. My kids love getting me to play some of these things with them because I'm so bad. So they like just get the laugh of the century watching.
And because Nancy's like number one in every game.
I am really hardcore in most games, but video games.
So, you know, and like when our kids, you know, are avoidant, right, or need reassurance, you know, there are things we do and don't say. So one, we never tell kids like, you're just being this because of that. Right. You know, like we don't shame them. Right. We don't whatever. We don't do any of those things. It's not useful, right? But what we can say to kids is really the emphasis on the coping skills. Like, wow, that was really hard, but you got through that. How did you do that? And
that's right.
And we want their brain to recognize the success, and we want to break that fear-based irrational thinking, but you can't do that in that activated state. And I always feel like
these are super important points that you just made there, Roseanne, which is another spot where I feel like some therapies don't follow through all the way, and that can be where you start to lose some of the effectiveness, is that last piece of really emphasizing for people, like meta processing is sort of how you were successful at something, like how, and really getting into the details of it. How are you feeling now because that went so well? What do you think about yourself because that went so well? Like you really want to reinforce for people. It's like a meta processing of a successful event. It really helps it stick with people longer, and it makes it more likely for them to use that coping skill or coping style more frequently. So that's a really important piece of the puzzle that gets skimmed over.
Because we want our brains to recognize as success. I mean, our brain naturally will do more of what it knows to be successful, right? Exactly. Even if it's using something that's a negative, if it lessens anxiety, we'll keep using it. So let's flip 100%. That to a healthy, positive coping.
That's
and it
really
means that we have to have, right? And that's why, you know, when you are struggling and you don't know what to say, right? You know, and you go to therapy, and therapy is important, but that's where you have to regulate, you know, calm the brain, then come in with teaching. That's why we do brain behavior reset. in our program. And again, you can go to drroseanne.com/help to learn more about it. And it's a solution matcher. We'll guide you through whatever is the right solution for you, because everybody wants to work one-on-one with us, but sometimes I can't. We also do diagnostic assessments, educational consults, and we guide people to the right solutions. We're doing more of that. But you want to make sure you are getting support. This is not going to go away just because your kid's a straight A student. If they're struggling with anxiety, if you're seeing those signs and symptoms, if you're seeing that, they are anxious avoidance, or you're looking to break generational anxiety. Like, we always think anxiety is genetic. I hardly see it in a brain map as genetic. What I see is inherited behaviors, right? I learned how to be an amazing 5-star chef from my mom, right? I inherited that. And then but I broke some of the other generational stuff that I didn't want to do, right? Including firstborn Italian male being the number one above Jesus Christ. I broke that. But
that's no kind of
but we want to be sure that,
go ahead.
Go ahead, hon.
Oh, I was just going to say that when we have that little banner across about, what to say and what not to say, the one thing that we always want to get across, even it can be hard to know exactly what to say, but if you're going in kind of with a soft, calm voice, that's always helpful for someone who's anxious. That, the more soft you approach, the more slowly you kind of, not that you want to be absurd about it, but you do
humor. You're already using humor all the time. Sometimes
humor is so helpful.
It's can be helpful. Don't start with humor if you're not a humorous kind of person.
Yeah, no, that has to be natural. But if it is, like, you and I are both love to throw on the humor. And that can be super helpful. And you want to kind of use those more supportive kind of words, like, I know this must be hard.
Yeah.
Tell me about your struggle. I remember as a teen, I struggled too. Those kinds of things. Knowing that you struggle too is always helpful, because I feel like that is one of the best things. I love to tell my kids about, all the crazy things that I did, and not all, some of the don't tell them all. I did in the 80s as a teenager, and there's no videotape of that. So, but they need to know that I'm not perfect. So, and it's good, whenever my kids are like, that's hard, I'm like, well, it was hard for me too. And this is, and like, you'll find your way. And I found my way. Do you need some help? I'll say, like, do you need some help on that? Here's somebody that says, like, definitely need to reinforce their successes, because they quickly forget and focus on what's not working, especially our catastrophizers, 100%. Anxious people. And this is somebody they says they discuss it a lot and many times. So important, because reinforce, and then reinforce some more people. 100%. And that, just so people know, because we talked a little bit about how important it is to know how the brain functions. And that's, I think, another thing that we have at our office that is different and really, really helpful, is that we try to work with how the brain actually functions and not against it. Right. And so the brain leans negative, and that is an adaptive thing, because it is much more safety protective if we are looking for what's negative than when we're just accepting and enjoying what's positive. Right. And so our brain is naturally set up to look for the negative. And so it takes more time to take in a positive. Like, there was that study that we saw where it takes a quarter of a second to take in negative information to make it like permanently solid in your brain. And it takes 4 full seconds to take in positive information and actually make that part of its understanding of how things work. Yeah. So it does.
We're wired. Our anxious brain is even more alerting to the negative, right?
That's right, 100%.
And that's why a lot of times anxious people, we often say, oh, they're glass half empty, is because they're automatically going to that. Their brain's getting reinforced for that.
That's right.
And I think that's helpful. And I think it gives you more patience for your anxious kid, because sometimes parents are like, I don't even know.
Yeah.
Especially when
why are they thinking that way? Like, how could they
nobody else,
that way?
Right? Yeah. Like nobody else was anxious. And this is a very anxious world, people. There's a lot of anxious kids, and some of my real empaths are picking it up from other kids. There's a lot of pressure on them to get into these schools. I know, Nancy spends and people, works within our brain behavior reset program, but she also works one-on-one. She does a lot of parent coaching to help kids of anxious teens and young adults. Does a lot of stuff with failure to launch, because failure to launch is our extreme versions of people who just didn't get what they needed and typically crashed and burned once they
exactly.
tried to
There's
launch on their own.
a lot of my failure to lounge kids are super high anxiety. That's what's underneath a lot of what's wrong.
Yep. And it could be anxiety on its own. It could be, often is, with other things like it turns from anxiety to OCD or depression. Very, very common. Or has autism features in there. I'd say those are probably, and we have a lot of pandas.
And also underlying anxiety, you know, they're often, like, anxiety often can be a cover up, because underneath it really is some genuine sadness or genuine fear or genuine thoughts that they're not enough, things like that. But also there can be really some missing skills, and especially because of COVID.
Definitely.
Oh my gosh, these poor kids have missed out on a lot of skills that they would have been developing had they been actually out there in the world and in school and doing.
I am still having conversations with new families every week about their kids never recovering during this isolation period, especially when they had a full, that quarter year of 2020 plus the next year isolated.
That's right.
Whether they were a college student or any age.
Right. When you think about it with the teens and the college students, that is the exact.
Always the worst.
Yeah. It's the exact time of their life where they're supposed to be. You know, if you look at the Erickson's model, where what stage we're in terms of what we're supposed to be learning about ourselves psychically, that's the exact stage where those kids are supposed to be learning independence, learning who they are compared to their peers. Like that's exactly what's supposed to be going on. And they were thwarted from that.
Yeah, no,
it was a big thing.
Yeah, somebody's asking, please let us know how to treat defiant kids. And here's what I want to say about that. So anxiety occurs along a spectrum, right? If you're hearing me, I'm always talking about self-regulation, dysregulated brain. Little insider thing, my community members. January is going to be self-regulation January. We are going to do everything self-regulation for the whole month. We're going to talk about our dysregulated kids, whether you're an internalizer or an externalizer. So defiant kids are externalizers. And these same principles apply no matter where you are as an internalizer or an externalizer. Except when you are an externalizer and you're angry, you're not going to talk to people when they're angry. You're going to find moments where things are not as heated. You're going to try to really validate, and there's a lot more to be said on it. But the base is the same. If anxiety is the driver of the defiance, yes, we manage things in a different way, but ultimately we don't want to meet them with anger. We want to self-regulate. Wherever your kid is at, we have to try to be as calm as possible. Not saying you're perfect. Remember, I asked for 80% on your parenting skills. You're an awesome parent if you're doing it at 80%, but it's just much harder. We think when a kid is more on the internalizer, they're easier, but the outcomes are the same.
They both have their challenges in their various ways. I mean, internalizers can be really tough in that they will not communicate what's going on,
or they won't get out of bed, or their school, or they won't go to school. They just shut you right down, and they'll be really avoidant. Somebody said yes, the pandemic hugely affected my teenagers.
So many teens. You're definitely not alone.
So many teens.
I want to go back to defiance for 1 second, though, too. Defiance is such a tough one. There isn't really one easy answer, and there isn't one easy treatment for that either, because, you do have to figure out what is underlying the.
That's right.
Defiance,
go to the root cause.
It could be anxiety, but there are, some core emotional needs that we all sort of have in terms of belonging and value and things like that. And it could be that for some reason, there's some way that this person is feeling that one of those core needs is not being met. And that is not in any way to blame a parent in any way, shape, or form, because we don't know why they don't feel that, the need is being met. Right. But that's likely underlying some of the defiance, and it's coming out in that angry, like, why isn't somebody doing this for me kind of thing.
It could be this is somebody with rejection sensitive dysphoria, where that's
a big one too.
Things. It could be that they feel that things are out of control and they're looking for control, and that's where that defiance comes in. So it's about root causes. I mean, this is what we do in our one-to-one program, is we get to the bottom of it. We do this amazing brain map. If you can't come and work with us, we do, we do an intake. If you're just doing what's called a brain check and you're fully remote, and we get to the bottom of what's going on. I mean, that's what happens when you have a team that nobody has less than 15 years of experience on your team.
Well, and also, everyone here does some element of depth therapy. So it's not, you don't have a straight up talk therapist in any office in our building, because that's just not going to get you there. Everybody does some element of depth therapy, whether it's somatic work, ERP, coherence therapy, whatever it is, so that we are getting to root causes.
We're getting to the bottom of it. And it's so different. Not to say that, again, CBT isn't useful in different points. And, you know, when people are dysregulated, they just can't access their frontal lobes. We know that through research. And so we stopped doing that because it just wasn't working. And
I mean, we use it in small doses because it is good to examine your thoughts.
Or after you do a lot of, you do neurofeedback or PMF, you do it at the end where you're really going into the deep stuff. And, you know, maybe there's a trauma there, but if we're trying, I always say, like, if we're cleaning the floor with a wet rag, it's just not going to happen. Right. Like we have to mop up the mess. We have to get in there, figure out what's happening. Where is that water coming from? Why is it there? You know, like all those pieces. And that's what happens when you get expert care. I mean, expert care is completely different. You can get much further faster when you go to an expert. And that's what we do in our one-to-one program. And in doing therapy with somebody like Nancy, who's really able to guide you quicker. You know, we recently had somebody who came from very far away and was seeing a therapist, was also had unfortunately gone to a neurofeedback provider that then told them to go on medication. And I was like, what's going on? That's not
that's going sideways.
For my fellow neurofeedback providers. But they were like, they came and worked with us, and they actually said, you know, in spending a week here, and they said some people choose to do an intensive with us, which we do. Sometimes we do a week. Most of the time we do 2 weeks. It depends on what's happening. And they do a post program remotely in our brain behavior reset. But they said the greatest value was actually getting deep and identifying what the issues were and walking away with what to say to their dysregulated and defiant kid who was very anxious. And that was the greatest thing that they came out in the tools and the resources. And that made me so proud because I was like, the brain part, I'll regulate the brain. Everyone always thinks I'm going to have the hardest time regulating the brain. That's easy. I know that. Like, I know how to do that. Like it's nobody's business, right? That's why people get on an airplane and whatnot. It's implementing the behaviors changes. Like, that's hard.
It's hard.
New learning for everybody, including
that's the whole thing. It's the whole family to some degree has little shifts to make, and that is hard. It's hard.
Yeah, but they can do it. You can do it, right? Like,
we help people do it all the time. Yep.
Yeah, and that's why you try the meds and your kid's not better, because you need to make the changes, you know? So like, as we wrap up in this awesome conversation, thank you for your comments and being part of this. And, you know, this journey is not easy, and every kid will face anxiety at some point. They will.
It's normal and natural to have some anxiety. It's when it's blocking your kid's ability to perform, though, to live their life fully, it's a problem.
And anxiety now is the #1 clinical condition across all ages. It's moved. It used to be depression. Now it's anxiety. And you know, my feeling, I feel that 70 to 80% of all depression cases start with anxiety. Anyway,
100%. So, I agree.
Yeah. Yep. I mean, they do. So don't go down that route. But if you're looking for one-to-one support, you're looking to work with Nancy, all you have to do is go to drroseanne.com/help. And take that solution matcher. You're not going to get to us unless you take the solution matcher, so we can guide you wherever you need to be. And thank you, Miss Nancy. This was a great conversation, and I know it's going to help so many people. And somebody said, thank you. There are special people like you that can put this all together.
That's lovely. Thank you. Special people like everyone out there listening who, you know, are taking the time to do that and learn it. That's awesome.
Yeah. Thank you for your kind words. This is super helpful. Thank you. And this was so giving her a fee. Yep. I wonder what extent it would be helpful for learning issues. Okay. I'm going to just end with this. I love my learning disabled kids. Nancy and I are the mothers of dyslexics. So it's amazing.
It's so helpful.
So helpful.
It's so helpful. Yeah.
Holy guacamole. I had a mom probably about a month ago that came to me, a little bit less, and she wasn't sure. He's a super easy kid, and she wasn't sure how much it was helping him. And then I was like, go back to the school. And he went a grade and a half in like
Well, and then the teachers were like, this is amazing. What are you doing with him? Yeah.
I know. So there's pretty much nothing neurofeedback's not good for. Truly, there's a research just, I'm not going to advise anybody to do anything unless I really genuinely feel it. But also, I never met a learning disabled kid who doesn't have some level of anxiety because their nervous system's so jacked up. But
also they recognize that they're not catching things in the same way that their fellow students are, and that's unnerving.
Yeah. So it's a powerful tool. And like I said, if you're interested in working one-to-one with us, you just can go to drroseanne.com/help. It's an amazing program. It really gets you to where you need to go. And so that you're not always spinning your wheels over and over and over again. And I'm going to leave with this. She said, God bless you, ladies. You made my day. God bless you too. Awesome. Whatever religion you are, God bless you. We all need spirituality and religion in our lives. So just know that you're taking the right path. You're here. Take one action. If that's just what you can do and you heard one technique, do it. Do it for 30 days, my friends. Thank you, Miss Nancy McDermott, and appreciate you so much. Be well, everybody. Sending everybody a lot of love, and God bless you back, my friends.